Dan is incredibly curious. He's an autodidact. He taught himself how to build the motherboards for the Apple computer and was indispensable early days. Incredibly curious, a polymath. And Steve Jobs would have no patience for someone that he didn't think was incredibly curious and creative. And the two of them were like best friends in the 70s, and we're going to dive into that. So welcome, everyone. So Dan and I will be looking at these images. Dan is a few weeks older than Steve was because he was born in April the year prior. You're 54, right? 1954.
54,
yeah. So Steve was born February 24th, 1955. It's fitting we're doing this in February. Here he is with his adopted parents, which you got to know because you lived in the house for a summer. And what are their names?
Paul and Clara.
Yeah.
And that looks like little Steve.
Yeah, yeah. And then this is Steve in middle school before you met him, because you met him when you were 18 and he was 17. And when Steve was in middle school, how would you describe? This is the blue box.
This is the famous blue box, which hit the public attention in '71.
Yeah.
Steve was a senior in high school. And it was Woz who, someone passed him the Esquire magazine with the article, Secrets of the Little Blue Box.
Yeah.
Kind of famous now. And because Woz was at Berkeley,
Yeah.
And Steve was in touch with him,
Yeah.
which is actually, pretty unusual.
Because they were 5 years apart.
Woz was 4 years
Yeah,
older.
and they were in the same high school, but he had graduated and was taking classes at Berkeley. Yeah.
And they had stayed in touch, and they were both geeks.
Yeah.
And so between the two of them, they tracked down Captain Crunch, John Draper, who was the black box impresario.
Yeah.
Went to federal prison.
Yeah.
And Woz just pumped him for like the details of how this whole thing works.
Yeah.
And I think by the time they were driving home, Woz is like, I can do a better design than that.
And so this hardware, what did it do? It hacked into the phone system so you could call long distance? What did it do?
The keypad was for dialing a number
Yeah.
once you had the trunk
Yeah.
to make the free call.
Yeah.
And I never understood, I never knew any about this till years later. But
Yeah.
in case, how many people are interested to hear a 20-second description? You want to hear how it works? It doesn't work anymore. The way it worked in the old days, the AT&T phone network, there was only one channel. So the audio went over the same channel as the clicker for the dial.
Yeah.
And the way the central office knew that a trunk was available was because it put 440 hertz. Not 440, 1440.
Yeah.
The Captain Crunch whistle tone.
Yeah.
Doo, like that. So if you heard that whistle, it meant the call had ended and the trunk was free.
Yeah.
So the scam was, and it was Captain Crunch who really figured this out, you call it a toll-free 800 number.
Yeah.
You get connected, and then you press the 1440 button, and then the local office or the switching office thinks the trunk is available.
Yeah.
But it actually doesn't. But you're not hanging up.
Yeah.
And then it's just waiting.
Yeah.
And then you can dial a number anywhere in the world.
And so what was significant in your mind for Steve and Woz doing this pre-Apple? Like, what do you think this...
Well, it was hugely significant because it means... So they sold more than 10, maybe not more than 20, and they were
Yeah.
selling them for several $100s each.
Yeah.
So that was actual money back in those days. Profit, you would call it profit. So that was Woz and Jobs partnering as entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And Woz said once, if it hadn't been for the blue box, Apple might have never happened at all.
Okay. So this is Steve in middle school, and this is him in high school. And then this is the house that he grew up in. And so, and you slept right by these windows for a summer?
Yep,
Yeah.
on the couch.
And this is the garage where you built a lot of motherboards.
Yes, and the door was always a little open because that was the business entrance.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know I've read some biographies where Steve said it was postmodern, very well designed. I think you said you don't remember it looking like
I
this.
think they blew it. Well, once Steve was worth $100 million, he
Yeah.
like paid for his parents to
Yeah.
upgrade their.
Yeah. So in
house.
'69 is when is when Steve was 13, and that's when he met Woz. So that's a significant date. And here I am at a TED conference with Woz, and just so you can see who we're talking about, Steve Wozniak. All right. So a little bit about you. You went to high school in New York, Pelham High School, where one of these musicians went. This is Pelham High School.
Felix Cavalieri, our hometown hero.
Yep.
Do you recognize Felix? I don't. I didn't know him.
Okay, you were a National Merit Scholar, and so you thought that would pave a way right into Harvard, and for some reason Harvard made a mistake.
Well, I liked Cambridge.
Yeah.
I had a friend at Boston University, and I used to hitchhike up to Boston, hang out with my older friend, and walk around Cambridge, and I loved it.
Yeah.
And I wasn't enough of a nerd to apply to MIT.
Yeah. And you missed the deadlines on the UC schools, so you applied to Reed. And Reed had about 300 students in its class. This is one of the dorms. And you were the class of 76.
50th anniversary this year.
Yeah, coming up. So you matriculated into Reed the same semester that Steve Jobs matriculated, and that's how you met. And this is a dorm that Steve lived in, and that you visited him when he was there for a semester?
And I never heard a story about how Steve ended up at Reed.
Yeah.
But he probably wanted to get out of Cupertino.
Yeah. So which window, do you recognize where the window was?
Well, Steve's room was on the other side.
Yeah.
This is facing the front road.
Yeah.
Steve's on the back side. And the woman who became my girlfriend was his next door in the dorm.
Yeah.
Which because I didn't know her till later.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah. So Steve liked Bob Dylan, and how would you describe his room? When you were telling me, you said one of these was in his room.
Well, if, another guy I knew on campus had said, you should come to my dorm and meet this guy, Steve. He's interesting.
Yeah.
And so I went up there on the third floor, and I didn't know anyone in the room. There were a bunch of people there. But Steve's room was surprisingly stark.
Yeah.
Nothing but the big, expensive reel-to-reel tape recorder.
Yeah.
And Steve was clearly proud of his dozens of hours of Bob Dylan bootleg, which it turned out came from Woz.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you were known on campus at Reed for this item. Maybe we're going to go back. We're going to go a little bit more into this later, but maybe give a brief synopsis of this item.
Well, I would just say I'm interested in a lot of things, and I like books. And so I was in the Reed College bookstore within the first week. I didn't have much money to spend. This particular book was $3.33, so I was in my budget.
Yeah.
And it looked just very interesting. And I
knew... And it's called Be Now Here?
Be Here Now.
Be Here Now.
And I knew very well who Ram Dass was.
Yeah, this is the author.
You know, from Time Magazine and Life Magazine. And
you and Steve bonded over this book. You shared it with him at some point?
I was blown away by that book. I had never seen it because it wasn't fiction. It was the guru was alive. The whole thing was live. And so I just bought the book, not knowing. And then once I read the first part of it, it was a quick read. It was just the most amazing story about this guru named Karoli Baba.
And did you share your book with Steve, or did you
buy
one?
I was carrying that book around all day.
Yeah.
Just carrying it around, showing it to people, because it resonated for me. And of all the people I showed it to, Steve was the one who really was interested.
Yeah.
And it turned out that Steve and I were interested in many things together. And you know, Carlos Castaneda was very popular at the time. Secret Life of Plants was very popular, and that was a technical kind of book. So we instantly became good friends over these topic areas.
Yeah. Now, who's in this photo? Who's that?
That's Robert Palladino, who was the famous calligraphy teacher at Reed.
Yeah, and you took his class.
Yes.
And you told Steve to take the class.
Yes.
And did Steve take it?
He did. And
was it a good class?
Yeah, it was fascinating.
Yeah.
I had never been exposed to that before. And in fact, I'm a lefty. And it turns out you can't do calligraphy with your left hand.
Yeah.
It just because you're pushing the nib across the paper. You have to
Yeah.
pull it. So I started using my right hand.
Yeah.
And guess what? It worked.
Yeah. And why was this calligraphy class so important in Steve Jobs' life, do you think, down the road?
Well, because many years later, we were making this Macintosh graphical computer,
Yeah.
which
is over there.
there's the Mac, and it wasn't part of the product plan necessarily of the Mac. The Macintosh was a graphical user interface. But by fortunate coincidence, John Warnock and Chuck Geschke had started Adobe, which was PostScript, which was fonts, graphical fonts, unlike the previous generation of computers. And so Steve Jobs was sensitive to fonts. And he gave a quote years later, if it wasn't for PostScript, if it wasn't for my Read calligraphy class, we might not have graphical user interface. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But of course, he was sensitive to fonts.
Yeah.
So that's the significance.
All right. So Steve was in for a semester. You're the fall semester that both you two did, and then he dropped out. But he stayed around campus for 3 more semesters, and then he ended up going to work for this guy. Who is this?
That is Nolan Bushnell, founder of Atari, and I just saw the story literally in the last month that Steve went home for Christmas break of '73 and never came back to Read.
Yeah.
And it turned out he had seen an ad, just like an ad in the newspaper for Atari was hiring. Atari was booming.
Yep, that's the 2600 over there.
Yeah.
Yeah, with the breakout disc. Do you know the breakout story?
Oh yeah.
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 Do you want to share it?
Okay. Well, that story came later.
Okay, so we'll come there. All right. So Steve's working at Atari. I'm told that he had the late shift because he smelled, partly because of his vegetarian diet. But you had the same diet, apparently.
I would contest that.
Yeah, you would contest that.
If Steve smelled, I smelled.
Yeah. All right. Well, you smell great right now. All right. So so at this time, you guys went to the one farm, right? Can you describe?
Well, let's see. That was after our trip to India.
Oh, one farm was after. Okay.
I'm not sure when the farm was bought, but Robert, who bought the farm, student body president at Reed, quite a character, very charismatic, and actually a detail you probably don't know. So Ram Dass was a huge cultural figure at the time.
The author of that book that you were walking around
The
with.
Be Here Now book, but he wrote many books. And he was famous for being the partner of Tim Leary, who at that point was headed to prison.
Yeah.
And
he was distributing LSD.
Yeah, they were both on Harvard faculty psychology, trying to figure out what psychedelics would do.
Yeah.
Nobody had any idea. And so, the anecdote I want to mention is that Neem Karoli Baba, the guru from Be Here Now, he had a huge following in India. Hundreds and hundreds of Western hippies from Europe and America were congregating, and they put together this band called Amazing Grace. And it was a touring troupe of 15 people, and one of them was a Reed College dropout who was older than us. And he's now... he was known as Jai Gopal. Now I'm blanking on his name. He's a famous musician, a kirtan musician.
Yeah. All right. So
anyway, wait. I have to tell you this.
Sure.
So that whole traveling scene came to Reed. Okay, and the women were all in white angelic. They were all chanting, and it was really pretty amazing. And Steve and I hung out with these people and got to know them. And that was part of the connection that made us want to go to India.
Yeah. So 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 you would hang out at this farm, and apparently this is where you guys stayed. This is an apple orchard.
A 260-acre farm.
Yeah, and then this is supposedly a photo of Steve in India, and apparently he worked at Atari to help pay for the trip to India. But you say you don't think this
Well,
is
Steve
India.
was never dressed like that in India.
Yeah, and then there was a movie recently. Who are these actors here?
Well, that was 2013.
Yeah.
And this was the first Steve Jobs movie. That's Ashton Kutcher playing Steve Jobs. That's Lucas Haas playing me. And
Did he call you to ask for get advice on how to play you?
no, but I spent a whole day with him.
Yeah.
He's very good.
Yeah.
I wish he would return my emails, but
Do you think he got you right in the movie?
I do.
Yeah.
I do.
So you went to India. How many weeks? How many months were you in India together?
4 months.
4 months. Yeah.
And the purpose of the trip was the Kumbh Mela,
Yeah.
which
Near
know,
near
right?
the Himalayas. That
and
one.
the whole thing came about, really, it was Steve Jobs talking to Robert.
Yeah.
And it was Robert who must have told him about the Kumbh
Robert,
Mela.
who owned the farm.
Robert Friedland,
Yeah, who owned
student
the
body
farm.
president.
Yeah.
Who anyway, and so because Steve was now working at Atari, he had money.
Yeah.
And at some time in the spring, we would call every once a month or so, and he goes, "You want to go to India?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Well, I don't have any money for travel."
Yeah.
And he said, "I'll buy your ticket."
So we spotted you money for a ticket.
Yeah.
Do you have to pay him back or no?
I would have, but
Yeah.
he never asked.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway, and actually, he didn't have to buy my ticket because when I told my parents I was going to India,
Yeah.
he said, "Oh, we'll buy you a round trip. Don't worry."
Yeah. They wanted to make sure you came back. All right.
That's right.
All right. So around this time, Woz built the Apple One. Why don't you describe what are we looking at right here?
That's a very historic photo, which I never saw till a year or two ago. The Altair came out in January of '75, landmark event, first personal computer that a consumer
Paul Allen
could buy.
got a magazine
Yes.
in
Seattle.
Out of Town News in Harvard Square and ran and brought it to Bill Gates.
Oh, 'cause
and
they-
said, we got to build software
Because they
for
were at
this."
Harvard. That's
and
right.
Bill dropped out. Yeah,
Right,
they
right.
went to Albuquerque.
Within a month of that, the Homebrew Computer Club started.
Yeah.
And Woz was at the very first meeting. And the Homebrew Computer Club is a whole interesting, there could be a movie about the Homebrew
Yeah.
Computer Club because it spawned so many companies. But so it's worth pointing out that Woz created the Apple I in just an unbelievably short amount of time, but I never knew this because I could never figure out the schematic of the Apple I.
Yeah.
It's a bizarre schematic.
Yeah. And now you build Apple Ones, right? We'll
I
come
build
to
replicas.
replicas.
But the thing that is really hard about the Apple I is generating video. That's
Yeah.
complicated. At a processor and RAM is pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
But what happened was that the 8080 that the
Yeah.
Altair was based on was almost $400.
Yeah.
Not really a hobbyist expense.
Yeah.
It was right, and so Woz had already built a TV typewriter in '75.
Yeah.
It was a cover story of Popular Electronics, and so that's a complicated thing. And that design was public domain. Woz said he customized his own. I believe him,
Yeah.
but he already had the video terminal.
Yeah.
So when the 6502 came out later in '75,
That's the processor.
the 6502 came out, $20.
And Brian, what's the chip right there?
6502.
So that was what Woz used for the Apple One. Okay, and this is a work of, real genius.
Yeah,
putting
a
this
work of
together.
really a work
Okay,
of genius.
So Woz makes this, and I know Steve and Woz said, let's form a company, and apparently this was one of the...
No, Woz did not say let's form a company. That was 100% Steve Jobs.
So Woz had nothing to do with it. Steve said, we're doing this.
Woz loved
Yeah.
his job at Hewlett-Packard,
Yeah.
was super happy there,
Yeah.
had to be coerced by friends and family to leave.
Yeah. So apparently these were some early names for Apple. Matrix Electronics.
Matrix Computer is the one I remember.
Yeah.
But,
And personal computers. And then the word Apple came up. Do you think the farm had anything to do with it?
I think that was 80% of it.
Yeah.
But of course, the Beatles was also a factor.
And then Woz said we can't do Apple because the Beatles have Apple Records. And what is Steve saying? Let's not worry about that. Is that a typical Steveism?
Yeah, probably. But we did end up having to do a settlement with Apple Records.
Yeah. All right. So what's going on in this picture?
Well, that would be so that's the PC board.
Yeah.
So the PC board didn't get made until after the Homebrew Computer Club meeting, where Paul Terrell, who started the Byte shops, that was the first retail computer shops. I never knew that there were 50. He built an empire of Byte shops. He had 58.
Yeah, and that was a key because Steve Jobs convinced him to buy 50 Apple Ones, and you helped make some of those in the garage. That really launched.
Absolutely
It was
launched.
not a real company until that big
That's
sale happened.
absolutely true.
Yeah.
But I don't think Steve bargained him up.
Yeah.
I think because Paul had dozens of stores and he was opening more.
He wanted product
It was
to move.
booming.
Yeah.
Yeah, he needed product.
Yeah.
And the Apple One was unique that it had the video terminal and the keyboard
So
and
the Altair
BASIC.
didn't have these things.
Didn't have any of that. The Altair was just like, it was just a car body with an engine, but nothing else.
Okay. So who is this? So now we're going to go through a bunch of people that worked at Apple when you worked there. So who are we looking at right now?
Ron Wayne worked at Atari, and he was a polymath.
Mm-hmm.
He's still alive and healthy, lives in...
And for 12 days, what did he do?
Well, more than 12 days, but he wrote the partnership agreement of Jobs and Woz, because neither of them had a lawyer or any contracts.
And he's considered one of the three founders.
He was.
But
Totally.
after a few days, he decided he didn't want the risk.
Okay, his 10% of Apple would be worth $30 billion, whatever.
And he got bought out for like $1,500.
Yes, but you have to understand, I'm friends with him now.
Yeah.
I was out of touch for many years, but the reality was that he was more than a decade older.
Yeah, so he was adult supervision at the start
He
of
was adult supervision, and he had many skills.
Yeah.
And he's a wonderful human being. And what happened is he wrote up the partnership agreement of Woz and Jobs, and actually he was on the partnership as a 10% partner, tiebreaker.
And
partner.
made Woz employee number 1 and made Steve employee number 2.
Well, that was later.
Okay.
That was Apple corporate.
Yeah.
But the good story here is that after the purchase order of 50 computers, Steve Jobs calls up Ron Wayne, all excited. Ron, great news. I just bought $30,000 worth of integrated circuits on 30 days credit. And Ron is a homeowner, okay, with not a lot of savings. And he's thinking, oh, I can't keep up with these kids. I'm going to lose my home, which was a very real eventuality.
Right.
So anyway, he said, I got to bow out, you guys.
All right, so what is this? What are we looking at right here?
Well, that's the logo that Ron Wayne came up with completely without any prompting.
Yeah, and that's Isaac Newton in the Apple?
Yeah, and if you can read what it says, Newton, a mind wandering forever through strange seas of thought, alone. I don't know where he got that quote. He didn't make it up.
Yeah. All right. And so again, this is the house that Steve Jobs grew up in. So you had been at Reed for 2 years. Steve had gone there a semester and then hung out, lived over a garage nearby for 3 more semesters. But you transferred to Columbia University. You were like a math psychology major, but even though you had moved back east, because you were such friends and you considered Steve your best friend, you flew back. And when the company had just gotten these 50 computers to build, you spent the summer living at his house helping to build the circuit boards.
Yes. Well, you're jumping forward a year.
Yeah.
So 75
Yeah.
was the summer. That was after my first year at Columbia.
Yeah.
I stayed in touch with Steve. I sent you some.
Because you did a gap year. Yeah.
India
was the gap year.
Right. And that summer of 75, I went back to California, and Steve and I got in his beat-up old Volvo and drove up to the Oregon farm and spent weeks there harvesting the apple harvest.
Yeah.
And Steve had this book that he thought was really fascinating called Rational Fasting, the Fruitarian Diet.
Yeah.
That's where the diet stuff came from.
Yeah.
And we have this whole orchard full of apple trees, and if you know how orchards work, a lot of them are half rotten. So there was like lots of half apples, and we decided to fast on apples.
Okay.
To see if.
No, keep going.
Not a good diet.
Yeah.
Not recommended.
All right. So what are we looking at here?
Well, this is now the summer of 76. That's when I worked in the garage. The bench was on the inside the door, but that is the bench, and those are the part bins, and there's a bunch of Apple ones there.
Yeah.
And so, summer of 76, my job was $3 an hour, doing final assembly and testing Apple ones.
Yeah. And then who's in this photo, and where are you?
This is the first ever public exhibition of the Apple I. It's the Atlantic City Personal Computing Festival of 1976, and I was the booth babe, so to speak, because Jobs and Woz had no patience to stand in a booth because there were hundreds of exhibits, and they were vitally interested in like checking them all out to find out what the competition was.
The Commodore, which you see, there's a Commodore over there.
So I was alone at the booth most of the time.
Yeah.
And I could give demos, but I couldn't explain. I didn't know technically what the parts were. That's why I say I was the booth babe. And I'm trying to look very serious there, but really I couldn't answer.
And then
questions.
After this, did you bring Steve up to your place in Pelham?
I brought Steve up to Pelham, New York, and I brought him into Manhattan to meet my uncle, who was vice president of the Bank of New York. And Steve, in his torn blue jeans, gave a pitch for this startup computer company. And we had a one-page flyer. That was it. And it's worth telling the story. And my Uncle Guy, who was a very wealthy man and could have signed a large check.
Wasn't convinced.
No, it's not. No, it's like, oh, thank you very much, goodbye. And never heard from him again. But 40 years later, Uncle Guy passed away, and I go to his funeral, and one of my cousins comes up to me and goes, Daniel, I heard from my dad that he really thought you guys were onto something good, but that if he funded you, you'd drop out of college and your mother would never forgive us. I just love that story.
So who's in the left of this photo? So you're on the right. That's Steve in the middle, and who's that?
And that's Woz.
Woz. All right.
And so that's the three of us at the computer show.
Yeah. And then if you go to Poland, what is this?
Well, 3 years ago, I was invited to the biggest Apple museum in the world in Warsaw, Poland. And I have Polish ancestry. Woz is Polish. And I was already in Germany visiting my daughter. And so I gave him a 2-hour talk. And the guy who ran that museum,
this is an exhibit in the Warsaw.
That's actually glued to the wall.
Okay. All right. So then you moved out to California, and you moved in with Steve for a few years, and this is that home that you moved into, right?
I graduated from Columbia in June of 77 and was in California the same week. And Steve and his girlfriend, Chris-Ann, and me went to go find a house to rent, and that's where we landed. And then we went and bought furniture, and
And so this is the product that you guys were selling, the Apple II, which is over here.
The Apple II was not actually ready for sale for another 6 weeks.
Yeah. And is this the office that you worked in?
That was the first office of Apple, and it was a nondescript, one big room in an office complex.
Yeah. So describe what
That
we're
is
looking
the.
at. So when
Hey,
you walk
wait a
in,
minute. That looks like my handwriting. That is my handwriting. What the heck?
yeah. So this is the office. This
Look,
building.
there's my name right there.
Yeah, Dan. So test engineering, production, lobby, offices.
Right.
And there's
so
Steve Jobs.
when I first started, I was actually in production.
Yeah.
But these guys were great. I liked working with them, but they weren't technical.
Yeah.
And I was a math wizard in high school. I knew I'd be good at computers.
Yeah.
And so I became the chief technician very quickly.
Yeah.
And not assembling them, but fixing the ones that didn't
So
work.
is this an image of that room?
That's the crew right there.
Yeah.
And this rack.
So is that you? In case
that's
people
me,
don't realize
that's
that.
me.
Yeah.
And this rack was literally the first day of Apple production. Because the last thing that arrived was these fancy urethane reactive injection molded cases.
Yeah.
And it didn't work very well. The urethane wouldn't solidify very quickly.
Yeah.
And so there's this whole story about the first 1,000 Apple IIs. The cases would sag a little bit and the keyboard wouldn't really, I would have to put it together, test all the switches, take it apart, file down the keyboard.
Yeah, and who are these people?
Well, that's Elmer Baum. He was already retired, but his son, Alan Baum, was a close high school friend of Woz's. Mm-hmm. And Alan Baum actually helped Woz write the monitor code, like the boot up code of the Apple I.
Yeah.
Because Woz was a hardware guy, not so much software.
Yeah, and who are these two?
That's Mark and Don.
Yeah, okay. And then how about this? Who's in here?
Everybody but me. That's like the whole crew. Everybody but me. I don't know.
Took the photo.
I was out for lunch.
All right, and then so what's going on in this what's going on in this photo?
Well, this is an actual photo from the Steve Jobs movie.
Yeah.
And this is the moment in time where they launched. So it was the first West Coast Computer Fair in April of '77. No. Yeah, April of '77. I was, in Columbia, in Manhattan. And Apple did, I don't know where they came up with the funding. Well, no, it was Mike Markle by that point.
Okay.
But we didn't have actual Apple IIs to sell, but Mike Markle had invested $250,000.
Yeah, so we're going back to that. So this I find fascinating. So the company is in that 3-room space that you wrote the handwriting for that we just saw, and Steve Jobs' card says he's vice president of operations. Explain that. Like, why doesn't it say founder? Why doesn't it say CEO?
Because Mike Markle was very much the mastermind. He was already a retired millionaire. He was a founder of Intel. And before Intel, he was at Fairchild. So the traitorous 8 who left Fairchild, he wasn't one of the 8 founders, but he followed on. Mm-hmm. And he's now a billionaire for sure. And
Fairchild created the
first integrated circuits, and Intel created the first processor.
Yeah.
So Markle was a very savvy guy, and he saw the promise of the two Steves.
Yeah.
And so he bought in, and he is the one who incorporated Apple, put together the board of directors, lined up the funding, brought in Don Valentine and Arthur Rock, and hired Rod Holt, who was the first actual shipping product engineer, and he was my mentor.
And he was at Atari?
No, he was not at Atari, but maybe he did consulting for Atari.
Right. But what I find fascinating about this is when the company was incorporated, Steve was a co-founder, but he kind of bounced around. He wasn't technical. He wasn't writing the software.
Right.
And the Steve that we've come to know, he was still being in development at this point.
He was a fledgling gadfly.
Yeah, yeah.
To put it fairly, but that was when Steve started wearing business vests.
Yeah.
That was his uniform.
All right, so we're going to go through a few of the first employees. So what's interesting about this guy?
Well, Rod. So when Rod started, Rod was a very experienced analog engineer, which Woz wasn't.
Yeah.
And the Apple II needed a power supply, and Steve Jobs gets credit for knowing about the switching power supply, which was a brand new thing.
Yeah.
If you look at these old computers, they had transformers the size of a grapefruit, and they were really heavy and very inefficient.
Yeah.
And Rod had he got a patent. I didn't know this till years later. When Rod started on the Apple, it was still the garage, working in the garage.
Where you worked for $3 an hour.
Yeah. And Rod said the Apple II just flat out didn't work. The reason it didn't work is because a big RAM array, if you loaded all the RAM chips, there was no decoupling to quiet the noise of the high frequency signals. And Woz didn't know how to do that.
Yeah.
So anyway.
All right, so who's this guy? And
That's Mike Scott, who was a friend of Markkula's. I'm not sure who actually got a hold of Mike. Maybe it was Markkula.
Yeah.
But Mike Scott was already a manager at National Semiconductor, which was one of the big three chip makers with Intel, Fairchild. And Mike Scott was kind of like the captain of Gilligan's Island. He's like this big guy, kind of jolly, but also very stern. And my image of Mike Scott was, when there was a problem to be solved, he would pull out a giant wad of $100 bills, and it's like, what's it going to take here?
And he was the president at the time?
He was very much the hands-on president that Steve Jobs could not have been.
Yeah.
So,
right. This is an ID. Who's this?
That's Chris Espinosa, who was far and away the longest continuous Apple employee, going over 40 years, 50 years. And he was like 14 at the time. Yeah. And so he used to come, and he knew Woz from the Homebrew Computer Club. Yeah. And he and Randy used to, well, Randy not so much, but Chris Espinosa used to come to Apple after school and give demos of the Apple II in the corporate lobby, which was like 8 feet square. Yeah. There was a little couch and a little table.
All right, so you're in this photo. Who else is in this photo?
Oh, that's me, Randy, and Chris.
Okay. And so that's this Chris.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And Chris is going to be on the stage at the Big Apple 50th anniversary.
Yeah. And what was Chris's role?
At the time, nothing but giving demos. He was a high schooler.
Who's the middle guy?
Randy became a closer friend of Woz, and Randy was really Woz's apprentice, sorcerer's apprentice, if you will.
Who's this guy?
That's Bill Fernandez, who was the same age as Steve Jobs, but had a mutual friend who knew of Woz, and he's the one who introduced Woz and Steve Jobs in 79 or 69.
And what did he contribute to the Apple other than introducing those two?
Well, the poignant story about Bill Fernandez was when Apple II production started, I was handed a screwdriver. It's like, you're going to assemble Apple IIs. And Bill was the engineering technician working for Rod, okay, for the first year. And after about a year, and Bill was like me, was a self-taught technician, very smart guy, but not a engineer. And when Bill found out he wasn't eligible for stock option, he said, I am out of here. And he quit, moved to Japan to teach English.
All right, well, we'll come back to that story. Who's this?
That is Sherry Livingston. That photo doesn't look how I remember her, but Sherry was the one corporate secretary who ran everything.
Yeah. Now at Harvard Business School, there's an Arthur Rock Center. Who's this?
That is Arthur Rock, and I only knew him because when there would be bi-monthly board meetings, and the members of the board would come through the production room, and they were all very friendly and wanted to see what we were doing.
All right, who's this?
That's Jerry Manick, who designed development systems at Intel.
Which was like the NVIDIA of the time.
He was a designer of the box. Yes, Intel was the...
So he designed this box.
Yeah.
The one that sagged initially.
I never knew till much later that if you go to look at the early products from Intel, there are these big development boxes with 8-inch floppies, and they have the exact same cooling fin holes, exact same.
All right, so you guys moved to this new office, is that right?
Yes,
Yeah, and then you started working on another product. What product is this?
So the story is that the Apple II in part was so successful because Woz, not Jobs, insisted there be 8 slots for expansion. Jobs wasn't sold on it. And Woz is like, I'm quitting if we don't get 8 slots. And as it turned out, that was very wise because the whole personal computer scene was exploding. And although the Apple II was very appealing, there were lots and lots, like you needed a serial printer card, a parallel printer card, a serial modem card, a language card, and an expansion coprocessor card. And so what was happening is the hobbyists with the Apple IIs were filling up all those slots. And some of those slots had firmware. And it was very common that you'd put a new card in, and now nothing would work because the firmware didn't talk right. And so what we did with the Apple III was that was our new flagship computer. It was the deluxe Cadillac of its time, and all of the peripherals that you wanted on your Apple II, we built into the Apple III. And at the time, I was now the engineering tech, okay, because Bill Fernandez left, and I was thrilled to be given the opportunity to build the prototypes.
And around now is when the company went public?
No, that was not.
That was a year later.
Another year later.
Another year. Okay.
So we spent an entire year building and refining the prototypes of the Apple III.
And was this called the Sarah when it was the prototype?
That was the code name.
Why did it have a code name Sarah?
Wendell
who was Sarah?
Sander was the chief designer. There were actually 3 or 4 designers. Wendell was the main architect. His daughter was named Sarah. So he got to name the project.
Okay, so what are we looking at here?
That's the Lisa, named after... Okay, so the Lisa project was the next generation stretch product, the hovercraft of computers.
This is when Steve went over to Xerox PARC and saw the operating system and the graphic interface.
And so Steve is the one who was advocating that there had to be... Steve got bored with the Apple III. Once he heard about the graphic user interface. And so Steve got the budget. So this was, when Apple went public, all of a sudden, what did they raise? I don't know, a couple $100 million. There was lots of money. And so Apple immediately hired all these guys.
So who are these people?
These were all older engineers. Paul Baker, Daniels, that guy. That's Rich Page, who was the chief architect of the Next. That's John Couch. There's Larry Tesler, rest in peace. Larry Tesler invented pull-down menus. Whoa! And he created HyperCard, a little program that made a big impact.
All right, so we're going to come back to this, but Lisa, I just want to pause. This is codename Lisa, right?
Yes.
Oh, and HyperCard, would that have been the precursor to the
World Wide Web?
Yeah,
that's
like
right.
you don't get Tim Berners-Lee creating that without that as an example.
And before, actually, Bill wrote all the graphics packages for the Lisa, which were then adapted for the Macintosh project, and that was called QuickDraw.
All right. So you didn't work on the Lisa, but you worked on the Macintosh, which was sort of a...
Well, I helped with the Lisa. I helped those guys build adapter boards and stuff, but I was a co-designer of the Macintosh.
And then this is the operating system, and here's Steve Jobs in his office with some Macs.
3 Macintoshes.
And then who's in this photo?
This was the publicity press photo George Crow, the analog engineer, Joanna Hoffman, the marketer,
MIT grad, Joanna
Burl
Hoffman.
Smith was the chief digital designer. I was sharing Burl's office. That's Andy Hertzfeld, who was co-author of the Mac OS. And Andy and I joined the Mac team the same day. There's Bill Atkinson, and that's Jerry Manick, the hardware product designer.
Yeah. And then here's an ad for the Mac.
Yeah.
I have a shirt over there with that hello font. And then this is the Mac team. Are you in this photo?
That's me in the red sweater and the mustache.
Yeah.
In the back.
Yeah.
And so
where?
right there.
Oh yeah, you see, yeah, you're rocking the.
I'm so tall. I was always in the back.
Right. So these people had the privilege of using a Sharpie to write on something. And who are these people, and what ended up happening to this?
Well, this was basically the whole Mac team at the point where they had decided on the tooling of the case, of what the case, and so it could well have been Steve Jobs' idea.
Where's Steve's signature here?
Front, top center.
Top center. Where's yours?
There's Steve Jobs. There's my signature, top left, right under Jerry Manick.
Yeah.
I might have been the third person to sign it. You see, Terry and Jerry were the two industrial designers.
Yeah. And so, because this is one of the first Macs right there, if we were to open it up, would this be in there today?
Yeah. There's Rod Holt, Andy Hertzfeld, Woz is on here.
So how many computers?
There's Woz right there.
How many computers, Macintoshes, had the signatures embedded inside?
The Mac 128, all of the Mac 128s. The Mac 512 probably still.
Yeah.
But by the Mac 512, they had to start spray painting the inside with conductive paint for the radio emissions.
Yeah. Okay, so by this time, Steve is no longer the VP of operations. He's chairman and board of directors, right?
Right.
Yep. And do you have any Apple business cards at home from Steve Jobs?
I definitely have a few.
And how much are they selling for these days?
I heard one sold recently for $2,000.
Yeah. So are you going to put yours on eBay, or you're going to sit on yours?
Probably not.
Okay. All right. So this is the house you lived in. So Steve had one room, Chris Ann had another room, and you had the living room, right?
Well, it was a 4-bedroom house, but the 2 middle rooms were like for little kids.
Yeah.
And when I realized I could put my hand on one wall and my foot on the other, I thought, no, I'm not going to go in this closet. So I took the living room.
Yeah. And so Steve had a room, and then Chris Ann, this is her high school photo, she had a room.
She had the other room.
So she didn't stay with Steve, even though she was Steve's girlfriend. She had her own room?
Well, she slept with him, obviously.
Yeah, but she had her own room. All right.
And,
yeah. And so this is.
I will add that the whole first year, being having my India trip, and I didn't have a bed. I slept on a yoga pad on the living room floor for the whole year.
Right. So this is at Apple. Who's in this photo?
That's Chris Ann on the left.
So Chris Ann,
looking pretty good.
High school girlfriend of Steve Jobs, worked at Apple a little bit.
I think she was doing QA, and she's a sensitive person, and the QA, anyway, she didn't last long. She lasted a month or two.
All right, who's in this photo?
That's Steve with a little baby named Lisa, apparently. And
this is Lisa today.
Yes, and Lisa wrote a really well-written memoir called Small Fry, and her childhood was traumatic.
And you know her, and she used to live with you at one point?
So she was born in 1978.
Yeah, on the farm.
Yes, on the farm. Mm-hmm. And Steve was there at her birth and named her.
Yeah, Lisa.
But basically didn't acknowledge parenthood. Okay. And, so Chris Ann was having a hard time. Steve wasn't giving her money for rent. Mm-hmm. I was running a group house by this time, living in the garage. Mm-hmm. And I took her into my house. Mm-hmm. I think she did pay me rent, but maybe
nominal.
Yeah, nominal rent.
So Michael was working for Time Magazine, and he wrote probably one of the first definitive books on Apple Computer called The Little Kingdom. Is that right?
It was definitely the first.
Yep. And so he gets you on the phone.
Well, Steve, it has to be said, he's a smart guy and personable.
Yeah.
And now he's the billionaire co-founder of Sequoia Capital, right? And
But he was a journalist at this
At the
point.
time, he was just a guy with a typeviter.
Yeah.
And
Steve had said, you can write the story of Apple.
Steve gave him permission. He gave us permission to talk to him because he felt a sympathetic story. In all fairness to Steve, it wasn't long before the press was like always leaking stuff. The press can be merciless.
Yeah, because Steve was worth about $100 million at this point because the company had gone public.
Yes.
And so he was writing a book. I understand that in the middle of writing the book, he told Michael he couldn't have access anymore. But I know he talked to Chris Ann, and Chris Ann talked about Lisa, the daughter.
Oh.
And then Chris Ann,
Okay.
and then Michael got you on the phone, and then tell us what happened.
News to me. I don't know.
What happened on your phone call with Michael?
Well, it was after I interviewed with Michael for hours.
Yeah.
Because he didn't know. I was giving him all the history of the computer technology stuff, and a week after the last interview, he calls me and goes, "Oh, Mr. Kottke, one more question. Does Steve have a daughter named Lisa?" And I'm thinking, that's not a secret.
Mm-hmm.
And Steve was denying and didn't tell me.
Yeah. So
I was very loyal to Steve.
Yeah.
I would never have wanted to divulge his personal details, but it didn't occur to me.
Yeah. And then Steve thought he was up for Person of the Year with Time Magazine, that Michael, who worked for Time, was involved in the selection or involved in writing about that. And that year, instead of Steve being the Person of the Year, it was the computer
of the Year.
And how did that impact your relationship with Steve?
That was the end.
Yeah. Steve.
Yeah, he was completely furious, and he dressed me down in front of all the employees.
Yeah.
And I didn't know why.
Yeah.
I really did not know why. I said, "I'm sorry, Steve. What can you?"
Because he felt that you divulging that Lisa was his daughter.
Yeah.
Meant that he didn't get Person of the Year.
Yeah.
Yeah, but apparently there wasn't a
He was
correlation.
just furious, and he said I should fire you on the spot, but he didn't.
Yeah.
So.
All right. So Steve hired John Scully, sold Sugar Water, and here's Steve's card. There's the Apple Newton, which the board, I think pushed Steve out, and John Scully produced the Newton. And there's a funny story that the Newton was supposed to have AI that could do handwriting recognition. A Russian software company delayed coming out with the software. Finally, it came out, and it worked horribly. It was a competitive disadvantage. And Scully told his team, "You got to make this big enough to fit in my pocket." And his team couldn't make it small enough to fit in his coat pocket. So they broke into his office and made his coat pockets bigger so that device would fit in. So it was an epic fail, but you don't get the smartphone, you don't get General Magic, you don't get the iPhone of today without that having failed. Steve left. He was with Next Computer.
Wait, one more. There's an anecdote about the Newton you have to hear.
Yeah.
I had nothing to do with the Newton.
Yeah.
Steve Capps was the main software architect. He was on the Mac team. Many years later, the trivia point is, what was the most highest return on investment of any Apple product?
What?
The Newton.
Really?
Why?
Because you didn't spend a lot of money on it.
No, because Alan Baum had gone over to England and was working for ARM.
Yeah.
Acorn Computer.
The chip, yeah.
Well, it was the Acorn Computer, but it turned into a chip design company. We all know what ARM is today.
Yeah.
Because they had decided to use the ARM in the Newton, Apple invested a couple $100,000 in that company, which was 100x rate of return.
So they did well because of that. All right.
When they sold it later.
So Steve worked at Next Computer. I know a guy that was adult supervision with him at Next and Pixar when he was not at Apple. And then he comes back, and I have the blue Mac there that Johnny Ives designed, and he simplified the products. You had left in '84, and then here's Steve later in life, and then iTunes, iPod, and then here he is around 2009. And so what happened in 2009 between the two of you?
Oh, not much.
But isn't this the year he called you?
Yeah, he did. And I had not talked to him in 15 years. 20 years.
Yeah.
I had my own busy life.
Yeah.
And but I get a call at 7 in the morning, and fortunately I had a phone by my bed.
Yeah.
And it's Steve.
Yeah.
And I think
He had cancer at this point, pancreatic cancer.
He had already had his liver transplant, and obviously it was not going so well.
Yeah.
And I didn't have to ask why he was calling, but I didn't expect an apology from him, and I never got one.
Mm-hmm.
But he apologized and said, "I'm sorry, but this is the only free time I have nowadays." 7 in the morning.
Yeah.
Steve was actually famous for calling people at all hours.
Yeah.
And but we had a friendly chat. And since you're asking, at some point I said, "Well, Steve, your life has turned out rather interesting and surprisingly successful. What do you think now about reincarnation?" Which had been a big topic of debate.
Yeah, and I'm gonna show you some slides.
Yeah, and he goes, 50-50.
Yeah. All right. So here Steve is Lorraine Jobs' pal, his wife, and then here he is with that image, of him and Woz from early days, and then he commissioned Walter Isaacson to write a book, or I don't know how that came about, but it was written. And you could look at in the video if you want to pause.
Well, no,
the
story is the way that book came about. Steve was fiercely private in his later years.
Yeah.
More originally about the products, because the whole Apple marketing thing, all was about secrecy until the great unveiling, right? But Steve was sensing that his clock was running out, and he said to Walter Isaacson early on, he said, "Walter, I respect your work. I'm willing to go forward with this autobiography because I want my children to know who I was."
Yep. All right. So this is a gentleman that you called soon after Steve died. Who is this person, and why did you call them, and what was that conversation?
Well, that's John Jondalee, whose name I never even knew until I saw it on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Steve Jobs died, gave the whole story, and it turned out he had run a restaurant in Silicon Valley that Steve Jobs had visited.
And he's Syrian, right? Syrian by descent,
yeah.
And this is his biological dad.
Biological dad. And his biological mother had very strict parents who just flat out forbid her to wed a Syrian.
Yeah.
And I never met Joanne, but Steve tracked Joanne down years ago through a private investigator, and apparently had a good relationship with her. Anyway, I called John up just to offer my condolences because I didn't know if anyone else would be calling him. He seemed like a nice guy. I don't.
All right, so this is one of the Woz building the Apple I. You build Apple I's, so if any of you want an Apple I, he can help you out. This you built in the 2000 teens, right?
I have to say, I was a huge fan of Burning Man. I went to Burning Man 15 years in a row. Every year, I would build electronic things, because that's what Burning Man's all about. And when they started doing the lottery tickets, I lost my patience. And so it got to be the summer of 2016.
So this was your Burning Man fix.
That was my Burning Man project.
Yeah.
I thought, why don't I build some Apple I's? I know how to make them work.
Yeah.
So.
So if any of you, who wants an Apple I? So he can build one for you. And then what are we looking at here? And then apparently for the Macintosh, you built the 12 prototypes.
I built all the prototypes.
And you have them in your home.
When I say prototypes, I mean all the versions of the PC board.
Yeah.
But I also built the wire wrap boards.
Yeah. And what are we looking at here? This is the Apple III?
I thought that went in the dumpster until a couple years ago.
Yeah.
It was a giant piece of. Wendell said, "We're going to build this Apple III. I hope
whose child is Sarah, hence the computer."
Right. And Wendell said, "Well, Daniel, I'm going to give you schematics, and I want you to build them up, and so here's some bare boards." But go back to that photo. Anyway, that is completely ridiculous because I didn't know how big it was going to get. So I think that's the processor board. It started on that board, but that entire board is the giant RAM array, and here's the card slots. And by the time it was getting this complicated, we had to start over.
Yeah, and the card slots were going to be locked down. You weren't going to be able to add things on the Apple
Well,
III.
no, there were 4 card slots. You were going to be able to add stuff, but there wouldn't mean much you would need to add.
Yeah, okay. So this is a postcard that Steve sent you, right? That's your home address?
That's a historical artifact that I found in a box of stuff from the 70s.
Yeah.
And
what did Steve write you here? Is that definitely his handwriting?
That's his handwriting,
Yeah.
and so now we're talking 75.
Yeah.
75 was the year that Steve discovered the book Cosmic Consciousness, and it really affected him a lot. It affected me a lot. It's not a spiritual book, it's an anthropological survey of remarkable human beings. And I could talk more about that, but I was writing letters to Steve. He was replying with postcards, lots of quotes, because, good quotes. Only enlightened one can understand fully the words of the enlightened one. Much zazen is necessary. That is a quote from Kobanchino, who was the Zen master in Los Altos.
Yeah, and then what does he write here?
Oh, that was for me. It said, read The Holy Science by Sri Yukteswar, who was Yogananda's guru, starting page 40. So,
and then why does he write,
Oh, I don't even know.
Right there.
I don't know.
Okay. There are not that many people who were there in the room when it happened. Dan, thank you so much for sharing all these memories. I'm going to ask Dan to kind of talk about his and Steve's quest for enlightenment, because this is before Apple. This is why they went to India. And I think Dan can kind of reveal a little bit on the 17-year-old, 18-year-old, 19-year-old Steve Jobs, and he kind of being shaped. Just before I do that, we went to the trouble to pull all these artifacts here. I just want to point a few of them out. There's a stereoscope that would have been popular when Steve was growing up. This would have been, technology that he would have appreciated.
3D.
Star Trek, this is the communicator from Star Trek, the TV show. If you know The Wrath of Khan, it happens 250 years from now. As we think about the past, I think it's exciting to use this moment to think about where we're going. I did ask Dan in my background research, I said, where did this simplicity come from? Is that from all the meditation? Is that all from the spiritual stuff and the enlightenment? He said, no. Going to Japan, and he had a lot of respect for Sony, and here's a Sony Walkman. I don't know if that's true or not.
That's 100% true.
Yeah. Here's the Polaroid camera. If you know Steve Jobs' biography, he spent time with Edwin Land, and Edwin Land got pushed out of leading Polaroid. So there is some similarity to their both experiences. I have the first Android phone. Here's two versions of the iPhone 3. There was never an iPhone 2 because after the iPhone 1, Steve didn't want an iPhone 2 because 3G was a big deal and he didn't want to seem like there wasn't a phone on 3G, so he skipped 2. So there's never been an iPhone 2. You have that. This is a product that came out under John Scully. It's a Mac. It's a version of this, which has his signature. But I think it's sort of interesting, to see it. And it has the same battery that a golf cart has. And it's 18 pounds. They called it the luggable. Can you imagine bringing this on a plane today and doing stuff? Here is the Commodore, which would have been the competitor at the time. I have a tape drive. I know a big part of the Apple was these disk drives and making sure that they could work, and the fan and overheating. So if I'll pass this around. This is an Apple II. Brian brought this in. Thank you. If you break it, you buy it. Pass that around. Here's some floppy disks. If you've never, for some of you millennials, Gen Z, you probably have no idea what this is, but it's literally a floppy disk. It's spun. This was my, case of all pirated software. I think if you're a certain age, you had this. And then this is what is this?
That's the analog board from a Mac SE, which was like the third generation Macintosh.
Yep. And then the computer that is being passed around, it is very possible that Dan repaired it or helped, was in the room when it was being built. Like that's his era. And then, you have the Vision Pro here. Just think of Steve Jobs, what he would do with this today, and, how this was built. A good friend of mine, Roberto Moda, was one of the first engineers who designed this. And, now Meta is like, leading the space after Google had Google Glass. It was a disaster. It's sort of interesting to see where Apple is on some of these frontier technology. But, at the end, if you guys want to come up here, and then the breakout, there's a funny story about Steve Jobs getting Woz to make the software for this and getting paid for it when Steve Jobs really made it. And
Steve Woz made it.
Yeah.
Woz made it.
Woz made it.
And Jobs was not honest about the compensation.
Yeah. Yeah, and he bought it, yeah. So I now want to let Dan just have the floor and kind of talk about enlightenment.
First, I have to say, I was dubious about coming to Boston to do this. John persuaded me, and I have been thinking about a memoir for many years. I have a busy life, and the reason I haven't gotten to it, well, John Rotenberg here inspired me years ago because he wrote a little inspiring talk about Steve Jobs and Buddhism. And I was in the shower the next day thinking, well, gosh, I really know that story pretty well, because I was the one buying the books. And I thought, oh, I have to write a memoir. You really inspired me that I think I have to write a memoir. And then I thought, well, the theme of this memoir, people would say to me, tell us about the trip to India. We want to hear about the trip to India. Write a memoir about that. And the fact is, nothing much happened in India. The good part of the story is the 36 books that we had read that led to wanting to go to India. And for those of you who are old enough, the early 70s was a wild time for Indian gurus arriving in America. There was a dozen you could name off the top of your head. There was really a total of several dozen. Maharishi being really the first big one. That's who brought the Beatles to India. But with respect to me writing a memoir, I thought, well, the theme, if it's centered on the trip to India, the theme is the two young dudes in search of enlightenment in India. That's the theme. Because we'd read all these books. I don't think I ever heard the word enlightenment before I was reading these books. Probably most of you have heard of Autobiography of a Yogi. That was a very popular book. Paramahansa Yogananda wrote that. That was dating back to the 30s, the 40s. He founded the Self-Realization Fellowship. That's kind of the same as enlightenment. And so Autobiography of a Yogi. So the first book we found was Be Here Now, filled with amazing stories, but it was more about a spiritual path. But the main inspiration of Be Here Now was because it was real. These people were still alive, and you could go visit them. And as it turned out, Neem Karoli passed away just 6 months before Steve and I went to India. So we never got to meet this guy. But Autobiography of a Yogi, it must be in its 10th printing. I don't know how many millions of copies have been sold, but it's filled with miracle stories about gurus who developed magical powers of spiritual meditation, and magical things happened. And actually, I would say neither Steve nor I were really sold on the miracle stories. But we were very much interested in consciousness and what could be available with our incredible human brains. And so back to the theme of the memoir, if the theme is searching for enlightenment in India, okay, I can tell my story. But then I thought, wait a minute, how can I end that memoir without saying what I think now? Because now it's 50 years later. It was 40 years later at the time Steve died. I thought, well, that's a big order. I have no idea what I think. You don't hear enlightenment in the news much. And there was a part of me that thinks, the daily news is filled with Gaza and Sudan and ongoing wars and human beings brutalizing each other. Endlessly brutalizing each other. The concept of enlightenment is almost like a cruel joke, which made it essential for me to go revisit this whole thing and then come to my personal conclusion, which I had never done. When Apple started, I was a self-trained engineer. All the spiritual stuff it was in boxes. It wasn't even on shelves. And it wasn't until Steve passed away that I thought, well, I better collect all these books. So actually, if you Google Steve Jobs Spiritual Library, you'll find a list of 100 books that I typed up. And I gave a talk about that. And now that I'm kind of refreshed on the topic, I could write a book just about that spiritual library, just about those books, nothing else, because I put in a lot of time. And there's another book that really inspired me called American Vedanta by Philip Goldman, which is a survey of Vedanta thought in America, going back to Ralph Waldo Emerson, right here in Boston. So that book sold pretty well, Vedanta in America, and I recommend it, and I found it inspiring. So I thought, well, if I'm going to write a memoir, it would kind of be the central core of it would not be a trip to India. The central core is what's contained in all these books that we read. So, and now that I was coming to give this talk, starting a few weeks ago, I only met John 2 months ago, I thought, well, I better really, come up with my story here. And so I've given it some thought. And I'm here to give you some conclusions. I thought I had more time, but that's okay. So what, let's see. Well, if I had more time, we'll do it continuing. Here's what I'll do. What I would enjoy, and which could be a standalone book, is just a rogues gallery of describing 24 gurus who were all in the media. And some of them are completely discredited, and some of them are okay. And, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, everybody knows who that was. Well, he actually was pretty well behaved, right? He wasn't collecting Rolls Royces. He wasn't seducing the young girls or the young boys. And he did get the Beatles. And the Beatles, both wrote sarcastic songs about Maharishi. Sexy Sadie and a few other titles. Buffalo Bill, that was about Maharishi. Anyway, but many other, like when Steve and I were in India, Sai Baba was the media star. Anybody know who Sai Baba was? He was the guy who had the vibhuti, magical. His whole thing was he was magically synthesizing from the interdimensional plasma. He was synthesizing magic powder, and he would sprinkle it onto you, and magical things could happen. And when I was at Columbia, Hilda Charlton was a colleague of Ram Dass, and I have vibhuti. She was giving it out. Anyway, the point of the story is, that's all kind of cultural history now, and it's all interesting. So anyway, now I'm halfway done.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and we're gonna get you back to do another talk, so don't worry about that. I think just in closing, just what does this quest for enlightenment have to do with you and Steve's kind of shaping an outlook on life?
Oh, well, I wouldn't put it that way, but I do have two thoughts I want to share with you people. One is, I'm a fan of Howard Gardner and multiple intelligences, 7 different types of intelligence.
He's given a few talks on this red rug.
And over the years, 15 years ago, when I was first reading his books, I came up with another 7 types of intelligence, which I think are completely valid. I won't get into that now, but so I have a list of 20 types of intelligence, which I think are, and I'm fascinated by artificial intelligence. So it's very much a current line of thinking. And so then to think about the definition of enlightenment, well, the first conclusion I came to is it's not one thing, it's a whole spectrum of things. And I started making a list of different types of enlightenment, which I think is a whole book idea right there. And then another part of me thought, well, where'd the word come from? You have to go back to Buddha, I think. Buddha, the 3 Noble Truths, impermanence, suffering, and the cause of suffering is attachment. The 4th Noble Truth is, once you realize that life is suffering, how do you get out? The Eightfold Noble Path of proper living. And so that's the core of Buddhism. That's all you need to know. On the topic of enlightenment and Buddhism, here's my all-time favorite quote. I don't know if I told you this. Maybe I did. My favorite quote, I tell this often. Kalu Rinpoche, reincarnating Lama, Buddhist Lama from Tibet. I never met him. Here's his quote. Remember that your goal is to come out of suffering, and that the cause of suffering is your unconscious craving for pleasure and aversion towards pain that arises in reaction to the sensations that you feel. And that is kind of the essence of Buddhist enlightenment.